Good evening and welcome to the Jigsaw Connect webinar series. Jigsaw Connect is a new series of 1-hour webinars for teachers facilitated by Jigsaw staff and clinicians. Before we get started, I'll go through a few guidelines. You'll need headphones, earphones, or a quiet space. Please close all other applications running in the background of your computer. If you experience any problems with sound or vision, please check your internet connection. However, if you continue to experience difficulties through the webinar, please contact us on elearning@jigsaw.ie. During the webinar, we would encourage you to ask questions via the control panel. These will be directed to the facilitator and answered at the end of the session. Please note that we cannot hear or see you during the webinar unless you have agreed to become a panelist for the webinar. So how do I ask a question? On your screen, you will see a control panel. You can ask a question at any time through this control panel. After typing your question, press send or the enter key. You can also expand this control panel to full screen mode. At the end of the session, please give us your feedback by answering the post-webinar survey on LearnUpon. Once this survey is completed, you will have completed the course and will receive a certificate to say so. We hope you enjoy the webinar.
Hi everyone, and again thanks for coming, and you're very welcome to Jigsaw Connect webinar for teachers. Today's topic is on the My World Survey 2, and we're really glad to welcome Professor Barbara Dooley and Associate Professor Amanda Fitzgerald from the UCD School of Psychology and Dr. Aileen O'Reilly from Jigsaw. And I suppose I'm going to hand you over to Barbara now. My name is Rebecca Murphy, and I'm going to be managing kind of the questions and that you send in through the control panel. And I'll try and get them sent to the appropriate people and get them answered as much as I can. So Barbara's going to talk to you for about a half an hour now about the My World Survey 2, and then we're going to have time for questions. Okay, so Barbara, I'm just going to hand over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so everybody should be able to see my screen now. Okay. I'm just trying to clear my screen for myself so that I can see what I'm doing. Okay, now, obviously you can see me, I can't see you. So welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be on this webinar with my esteemed and good friends, colleagues, Amanda and Aileen. And I'm going to go through the presentation firstly, and then we'll take the questions and answers between us. So we're happy to discuss anything that might emerge from the presentation today. So we're going to talk firstly through some of the findings that relate to those that are in the second level school sample. And so that will be the main focus of the webinar today. Okay. So first I'm going to start off with a definition of mental health, which is from the World Health Organization. And I think it's particularly relevant for any of us working in an educational setting. So mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. And I think any of us that work in the educational sector, we're there to also to try and ensure that those students that we work with do realize their potential. And at times we need to be mindful of their mental health so that they can achieve that. We also need to think about how we can help them cope with the stresses that maybe either secondary education or third level education may impose on them, so that they can then go on to be productive and fruitful and make a contribution to their society. So I think we have a lot to offer in this space as teachers and educators. So going to look at the context for My World Survey 2, as it was for My World Survey 1. Why are we focusing on mental health for our 12 to 25s? So I think the graph in front of you there demonstrates, which is by the yellow part of the graph, it illustrates that mental health disorders. Now this particular graph is about disorders, but the same pattern emerges if we look at sub-threshold levels of mental health difficulties such as anxiety and depression and other mental health difficulties and distress. They tend to emerge in the early teens. You can see the increase there beginning in early teens, peaking in around 20, dropping off and tend to leveling to, in and around age 30, but certainly by the age of 25 is well dropping. And we know from research that that 75% of all mental health difficulties emerge before the age of 25. So this is a key time for us to look at the mental health difficulties and what kind of supports should be in place for young people within this age group. So the 12 to 18, which is the typical age range of those in second level, are really key, because you can see this is a time where it's really beginning to increase. And those of us that are in the third level sector, we tend to have our students predominantly 18 to 23, 24. So again, a really peak time for mental health difficulties. So the My World Survey 2, why is this important research? Well, one of the things about this piece of research is its uniqueness in that we do cover in the one type of assessment or survey a broad range of young people going from 12 to 25. There are very few surveys in the world that actually capture that broad age range. Many surveys go 12 to 18, and then others go 18 and above. So it's quite unique, and it's useful because when we looked at the graph a moment ago, this is the age range we should be looking at if we're interested in mental health of young people. It's a very large sample. It's over 19,000 young people responded. In fact, we've even more than that, because that sample refers to Irish young people. Quite a number of the students in the third level sector who are not from Ireland also participated, which also provides us with another valuable source of information about young people more broadly. It also looks at what supports and challenges. So we take a risk and protective perspective. So it's important not just to focus on risk, but also to look at things that are protective, so we have a better understanding of young people's mental health. And it also affords us the opportunity to look back and see what we found in My World Survey 1, which Amanda and myself reported on in 2012, and see where there have been changes since then. The research also acknowledges a complex world of young people. So we didn't just go and repeat My World Survey 1. We went to be consulted on many occasions with young people, particularly those part of the Jigsaw a National Youth Panel, on what it is that young people today think are important in terms of how it might be impacting on their mental health. And that was a really useful engagement, and we believe a very meaningful engagement to have a good understanding of what it was that we should be looking at this time around that we didn't look at when we conducted My World Survey 1. And there is a hope that this would go on to inform the development of practice and policy in Ireland. So just very briefly, and this is not all of them, but some of the protective factors and risk factors that I'll kind of look at today include self-esteem, resilience, optimism, social support, life satisfaction, body esteem, school and peer connectedness, parent approval, coping strategies. And on the risk side, anger, being bullied, alcohol behavior, drug use. I'm gambling and parent criticism. I've less on gambling than some of the other variables, because when I began to really delve into the data for today's presentation, I really wanted to focus on variables that I felt were important for teachers in second level schools or post-primary schools, and what they might be interested in, or you might be interested in. So and I'm not going to go into all of this in any great detail, the report itself details the methodology used. So we took quite a rigorous approach to our methodology. I'm just going to focus initially here on the adolescent sample. So we have over 10,000 in the adolescent sample. That's those that were taken from the post-primary schools sector. So we had 83 randomly selected schools who participated. We used a sampling strategy to ensure we had appropriate gender mix of schools, size of school, and the DEIS, non-DEIS status of the school, and that we had data from every single county in Ireland. On foot of that, and on the basis of the respondents who participated, we have a sample with 56% female. And the description of the young adult sample and the seldom heard groups are also in the main report. But for the purpose of today, I'm not going to go into that. So I'm going to start looking at some of the key findings just broadly in relation to adolescents, and then look at different areas that are important for those working in the school sector, such as the DEIS, non-DEIS status, the school cycle, junior cycle versus senior cycle, and gender of our participants, male and female. So just looking very broadly at the mental health status of our adolescents. So the graph that's in front of you here This is broken down by gender, and we see that we look at the males, which are the kind of the darker purple, they were actually more likely to be in the normal range than females. So overall, 60% of the adolescents fell within the normal range for depression. Now, we used the depression anxiety stress scale, which has norms developed internationally for categorizing how people respond into what's called normal, mild, moderate, severe, and very severe, acknowledging that all of us at some level experience some level of feeling low, and also with anxiety, some level of anxiety. But there are parameters which would be considered to be normal, mild, moderate, severe, and very severe. So when we look at this graph here, we observe that males are more likely to be in the normal range than their female counterparts in school. Overall, 60% were in the normal range, 11% in the mild, 15% in the moderate, 6% in the severe, and 9% in the very severe. Again, with the female sample more likely to experience severe in comparison to what we would likely to see due to chance. So they're more likely to be in that category. We see a similar pattern for anxiety, but it's quite marked for female gender on very severe in this graph here. So if you look at the very severe group, we see that 19% of females are likely to be categorized in very severe, whereas 9% of male respondents would be in that category. And if you look at the mild and moderate, the level of the categories are very similar, a slight disparity at severe, but a marked disparity at very severe. And again, when we look at the normal range, males are more likely to be categorized as within the normal range, whereas the females not. So 59% of males categorized as normal. Overall, 51% fell into the normal range for anxiety. So it's important that gender is at play here. These are not unexpected findings. These are things that we see internationally in other cohort studies as well. Then looking at some factors related to depression. Now, when we take depression and it's categorized for normal, mild, moderate, severe, and very severe across a whole range of factors, we see that there are differences for those who are normal compared to peers that would be very severe. So for illustration purposes, I just picked two of what we would consider strong protective factors, which are self-esteem and life satisfaction. And you will note these are statistically significant. So if we look at those young people who are in the normal range for depression, their self-esteem is above 30, whereas those who are in the very severe, they're below 20. Now, self-esteem of 20, and we use the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, and there are lots of studies all around the world, both with adolescents, young people, and adults, and we can really begin to extrapolate the meaning of what these scores might be. So a score of below 20 would be a person with a compromised self-esteem. So you can see for those young people who have very severe depression, they also have a very low level of self-esteem. So you'll see a coupling of some of these risk factors. When they're high, they're coupled with low protective factors, making young people quite vulnerable, because we do know that self-esteem is a very good protective factor in navigating the world and protecting against mental health difficulties. And you also see from their life satisfaction, again, for those young people who report very severe levels of depression, their life satisfaction is considerably and significantly lower than those who would be falling within the normal range. So that's just an example, but this type of pattern plays out across many of these protective factors when we look at them. Just to add, all of the data that I report here are statistically significant. So if there's no evidence of an effect, I will draw attention to that. Looking at suicidality, we had 3 questions that tapped into the suicidal ideation behaviours of adolescents. We did not ask these questions in My World Survey 1. At the time, it was felt that this would be unacceptable, whereas this time there was an acceptance that it was an important question to ask, and the ethical boards that looked at our research for approval agreed with us that it was important to ask young people these questions. So when we look at that, 41% thought that they're about taking their own life, even though they wouldn't do it. 23% reported they had deliberately hurt themselves without wanting to take their own life, and overall 6% reported a suicide attempt. Just checking my time there, sorry. So then moving on and looking at the links between suicide attempt and risk and protective factors. Adolescents who reported to have made a suicide attempt displayed significantly higher problematic drinking, lower levels of school connectedness, peer connectedness, optimism, personal competence, all of these very important things that help young people navigate their world in a successful way. So family cohesion, family support, friends, adult support, self-esteem and body esteem. And we see a very similar pattern for deliberate self-harm. Then looking at the stressors that young people tell us they're experiencing, I suppose not unexpectedly, they tend to be related to their school. And this is not to say that school, our teaching or anything like that are where these stresses come from, but it's where most young people spend a lot of their waking day. No doubt if we asked any of us what causes us stress, we would probably put those sources in where our work lies. Certainly would for anybody I know. If you say, well, what stresses you out? Often those things will emerge that relate to where their work or in the case of our students, they're in school. So this is where a lot of their stress will be perceived to be driven from. So we see school, exams, homework, and then other areas would be money, relationships, parents, family, and friends. So I don't think this is anything specific. It's rather to do with this is where a lot of their waking day is spent. Then looking at coping and the strategies they say to use that they cope with. Friends, music, sports and exercise are top, and that these are really important. Sports and exercise, excellent to see that they're reporting sport and exercise as one of their top ways of coping with their strategies or their stresses. And obviously for young people, they will seek the support of their friends when they're feeling stressed. And many will also find music is very important. 41% reported coping well with their problems, 51% sometimes, and 8% said no, they don't cope well with their problems. We looked at things like school connectedness. So we were interested to see to what extent, and I'm sure from your own perspective, this is important too. Is there a link between how a young person feels their connectedness to the school is and time spent away from school? And we see that there is this linear trend. So for young people who have never been absent from school, their school connectedness is significantly higher than those particularly who have 6 days more or more absent from school. So this downward trend in connectedness being linked to an increase in the time away or absent from school. Looking at teaching support, additional teaching support, overall 11% reported having additional teaching support at school. When we looked at that, we found that young people who received additional teaching support, they were higher on depression and anxiety, and lower on some of the protective factors such as optimism, satisfaction with life, self-esteem, and peer and school connectedness. So again, a slightly more vulnerable group than peers who don't receive additional teaching support. Then looking at talking and help seeking, and we do know that talking and help seeking are really important, particularly for young people who are experiencing mental health difficulties, that they reach out and reach out appropriately. Overall, 60% of adolescents said they talk to somebody when they encounter problems. In terms of their health-seeking behaviour, So we asked them the type of sources of help they're likely to use for support. And we categorize these into both informal sources and formal sources. Looking at informal sources, we see that the top two are their parents and friends. So 68% are likely to reach out to parents and friends if they have difficulties and need support. 37% to relatives, and 33% online. Now this online may appear low, and it looks like it's lower than when we did My World Survey 1. And we think it's the way it was phrased, and that it was phrased slightly differently in My World Survey 1, and this may contribute to this percentage looking like it's lower than when we went to when we collected the data in 2012. Looking at formal supports and sources, top one was doctor, 21%, and teacher guidance counselor at 20%. Turning to social media sites and apps, we see that 96% of them have Snapchat, 90% Instagram, 54% Facebook, 28% Twitter, and 4% of a dating app. Then spending time online, importantly, 67% had their settings private, 18% partially private, 12% public, and 3% they didn't know. These data in relation to privacy are actually better than the older sample that we looked at in the post second level sample. 63% never interacted with people online they didn't know, and 7% were sent mean messages occasionally. Time spent online, so 34% daily spend 34% spend 3 or more hours online per day, 29% 2 to 3 hours, 25% 1 to 2 hours, and 12% less than 1 hour. Linking that to anxiety, we see that those that spend 3 or more hours per day online that they're more likely to be in the very severe range for anxiety, and a similar pattern was observed for depression. This is also supported by recent research that was published in September 2019, which found that more than 3 hours online per day was linked to poorer mental health. Those spending less than 2 hours online, they had higher problem solving, coping, better personal competence, they had higher levels of optimism, lower support from friends, and lower support based coping. So there was a bit of a mix here in terms of the time spent online and whether it was supported. So in terms of when we're thinking about young people online, for some of them, if they're spending a proportion of time online, they may be getting this kind of support that are important to them. So it's not an all or nothing. It's not a case of all of being online is a poor thing, but certainly we see that those are spending more than 3 hours online. It may be indicative of poor mental health, or potentially displacing other important activities such as sleep and sports and exercise. Looking at the One Good Adult, we see that 76% reported having high support from One Good Adult, and this was linked to better mental health. So on the right-hand side, we have the graph, and if you have high support, you're more likely to be in the normal range, which is an important thing. So that this is a message that Jigsaw have been putting out since 2012, that importance of the One Good Adult, that One Good Adult can be within the family or outside the family. It can be within the school, within sports or whatever, but it's really important to young people that they have the support of that One Good Adult. Then moving into some areas that are related to school-specific data. I'm going to start off with the DEIS school versus non-DEIS. So we had 26.5% of participants were within a DEIS school, 58% of them were in the junior cycle, and approximately 58% of them were female. So looking at the DEIS, non-DEIS status. In those that were in a non-DEIS school, they had significantly higher father approval, they had significantly higher peer school connectedness, they also had significantly higher school connectedness. Those that were in a DEIS school, they had significantly higher avoidant coping behaviour. And we do know from My World Survey 1 that avoidant coping was linked to a series of other poor outcomes. So we do know that avoidant coping, this idea of putting your head in the sand and thinking my problems will go away, is not a good strategy. So it's something that needs to be worked on. Also within the DEIS schools, the level of reported self-esteem was lower, and also life satisfaction. In addition, DEIS school students reported higher anxiety. So we had those in a DEIS school, 17% of them were classified with very severe anxiety versus 14% in a non-DEIS school. Similar pattern for depression, where 10% were very severe in a DEIS school versus 8% in a non-DEIS school. Cannabis use was higher, 20% in a DEIS school versus 13% in non-DEIS. Deliberate self-harm, again, was higher in the DEIS schools. The suicide attempt rate was also higher. So here it's 10% in a DEIS school versus nearly 5% in non-DEIS. That gap's quite significant. Level of bullying was higher in a DEIS school, 42 versus 38. And time spent online was also higher, 44% versus 31%. And not getting the recommended sleep was higher in a DEIS school. So 29% were not getting the recommended sleep. We used the World Health Organization's definition of recommended sleep in terms of hours to classify whether they were getting the recommended sleep or not. And also the number of days absent from school was higher. Non-DEIS schools reported higher school satisfaction and that they played sport more regularly. Where we had no DEIS status effect, and that's with likelihood to talk about your problems, alcohol behaviour, support from one good adult, suicidal thoughts, resilience, optimism, social support, planned and coping strategies. So there were many variables where there wasn't an effect, but for some there was. Looking at the school cycle, we see that these data will support pretty well anything we will see internationally. So if I go right back to the very first graph where I was talking through that the mental health difficulties begin to emerge in the early adolescence and they peak around 20. So it's not unsurprising that we see a lot of these protective factors are higher than the junior cycle because they are typically younger than the senior cycle. So these are not unexpected observations and findings. So looking at the junior cycle, in the junior cycle, students in this junior cycle are likely to do have significantly higher peer school connectedness. They have higher support from family. And looking at the senior cycle, they engage in significantly higher avoidant coping. They have lower personal self-competence. They have lower levels of optimism, lower levels of self-esteem. They have a higher school connectedness. So that's junior stuff, but they have lower. They have lower satisfaction with life. Also, when we look at school cycle, the senior cycle students report significantly higher not talking about their problems, and we know that that's an important piece that people and young people and adolescents are able to reach out when they're experiencing difficulty. So the message for talking is one that's important. That does not say that just by talking all your problems will be resolved, but it's also that first step in getting the support that might be needed. So it's an important message for our senior cycle students that it is important that they do talk about their problems. Senior cycle students, again, more likely to have a higher depression. So that's 17% of severe and very severe in the senior cycle versus 13% in the junior cycle. Higher use of cannabis, higher reporting of suicidal thoughts, higher reporting of deliberate self-harm without wanting to hurt oneself. Risky alcohol behaviour, I suppose not unexpected because we see that there are quite a number of the junior cycle who do not engage in alcohol consumption at all. This was higher than in My World Survey 1. They also spend more time online. They report higher levels of school dissatisfaction. And unfortunately, higher mother and father criticism. Now, the why of that we don't know, but they do report that their mother and father criticism is significantly higher. And we know from My World Survey 1, this was an important piece that was linked to the mental health of young people. So that's something, that's an important message for families, that this sense of maybe not being overcritical. Junior Cycle report a higher rate of playing sport regularly, 85% the junior cycle versus 76%. Probably again not unexpected. Many students in Leaving Cert that their engagement with regular sports sometimes drops off because of the impact of the upcoming Leaving Cert and the exams. Again, recommended sleep was significantly different. I would be cautious on this one because the definition of recommended sleep for 18-year-olds as adults differs from younger adolescents, and many of the senior cycle are 18. So that's something just to be mindful of. Where we've no school cycle effects, these are for suicide attempt, both approximately 6%. For those that were bullied, both groups approximately 39%, and both groups have around the same level of high support from a one good adult at around 76%. And levels of anxiety didn't differ. That doesn't mean to say that anxiety was low, it just said that there was no observed differences between the two groups. In relation to gender, again, the findings are not unexpected. Females report higher levels of mental health difficulties and lower levels of a lot of the protective factors, but not all, as I go through some of them now. So males reported higher problem solving, which is this capacity to engage with problems and find solutions. And females report higher support focused coping, so that's reaching out for people around them to help them deal with their problems. They also have higher support from friends and adults, and these are really important protective factors. Females, however, report lower levels, significantly lower levels of self-esteem, optimism, and personal competence, life satisfaction, but they report higher school connectedness and high support from a one good adult. So females in general surround themselves with people that they engage, so they I suppose not unexpectedly that they operate in a much more connected way than many of their male counterparts. Females also reported significantly higher levels of depression, anxiety, greater likelihood to talk about their problems, which is an important thing. They had higher suicidal thoughts, higher rates of deliberate self-harm, higher rate of suicide attempt, higher rates of being bullied, but higher rate, as I said earlier, of support from a one good adult. And they also report a higher rate of spending 3+ hours online each day. So kind of a mix of good things here and maybe things that can put females more at risk. Males report significantly higher use of cannabis. But they play sport more regularly than females, and again that's a well-known and well-established in data. And they also, males engage in riskier alcohol behavior. We saw no gender effects for school satisfaction and sleep. So briefly turning to the changes between My World Survey 1 and My World Survey 2, the big thing we see, and I suppose teachers that have been in schools over the last 10 years or so will notice this, that we see a significant increase in the percentage of adolescents reporting severe and very severe depression, up from 8% in My World Survey 1 to 15% in My World Survey 2. So that's a significant increase in terms of the reported depression levels among the adolescent sample. And again, we see a big shift in terms of reported anxiety. In My World Survey 1, the severe and very severe combined categories was 11% of that sample reporting severe and very severe anxiety, and this has increased to 22%. So that is over 1 in 5 of young people being classified in this range. So that is a major shift in terms of the anxiety level of adolescents from My World Survey 1 to My World Survey 2. In terms of the drinking behaviour, 58% of adolescents in My World Survey 2 reported never drinking alcohol versus 49% in My World Survey 1. So there is a shift, there's a bigger proportion of them not drinking at all. And again, nearly 25% of fifth years did not drink. So that again was a shift in the positive direction. But what we did see was for those who are drinking, they tend to be engaging in more problematic drinking. So the overall drinking is down in terms of never drinking, is up. More of them are not drinking or never drinking at all. But if they are drinking, it's shifting in a slightly more problematic direction. And we know that the level of alcohol is also linked to mental health. So other factors that changed from My World Survey 1 to 2, so problem solving, coping went up, which is positive. Support focused coping in males went up, positive. Perceived support from family, friends and adult up, again positive. And the one good adult, high support from one good adult went up, again a positive change. Things that were less positive was that resilience was down, levels of optimism down, self-esteem down, life satisfaction down, and school connectedness. So on the one side, there is a connectedness piece that's up, but on the other, some of the other protective factors have significantly decreased. And I'm going to finish with just two quotes to allow for questions. So the first quote is, I think we should have one half class each week talking about our mental health with teachers or counselor, as this would really help know how to deal with issues about friends and families. So just demonstrating for teachers the importance that you have in terms of young people. Now, this isn't to shift all of it onto you and the burden to you, but just that the acknowledgement of students in school, how important you are to them. And this then is a more worrying quote. And this is a 13-year-old female, and I picked this out last night from the data set. And I didn't change any of the spelling, so it's just exactly as how it came into the data. I worry a lot about people liking me. I feel worthless a lot of the time. I feel like I'm nothing special, I'm worthless a lot. My parents criticize my life choices and are really mean to my best friend. I worry we won't be allowed to spend time together anymore. Everything seems pointless. I get very pressured to do well in school. I'm often physically hit for getting below 90% in an exam. This stresses me a lot. Sometimes my heart skips a beat really fast. I feel like I'm going to faint and my heart starts pounding. Quite a poignant quote from a young 13-year-old. So that's just to say, I'm going to thank you for listening. We have our emails are there. We're very easily found, myself, Amanda and Aileen, and the survey is online. Many of you may have already had a look at it. So at this stage now, I'm going to come out of the presentation. I'm going to, I hope, go back to my webinar, and I'm going to change and go back to take questions, and my fellow colleagues are with me now, and we're happy to take questions from you in relation to what I've just presented. Hopefully it was coherent, and it's very strange to just talk to your computer, I can tell you. And if no feedback from anybody else, you could be all looking out the window for all I know.
Great. So we might start with the questions, and I have two questions here that people have posed. So I might start with one, and then Aileen, do you have some questions as well that people have posed to you?
I do. The three that have come in, yeah. So we can.
Thanks so much, Barbara, for talking us through that data. So the first question here is, I suppose, does social media play a contributing factor? And we've looked carefully at this, because internationally the research on social media and how it links with mental health is inconsistent. But we're starting to see a body of evidence showing that social media is related to an adolescent's or young person's, their life satisfaction, their depression and their anxiety. But what the research is showing is that social media, excessive use of it, may displace activities, as we found in our data. So if you're using social media for a lot of the time, you're less likely to play sports, you're less likely to engage in physical activity, your sleep patterns are poor, and even internationally they show you're more likely to be cyberbullied, and that these factors, which are potentially negative for our mental health, that they might explain the reasons why we see that link between social media use and mental health. But they're also saying it's not just about the number of hours that the young person's online. We also need to see, well, what are they doing online? Are they looking at good websites, negative websites? Are they interacting with their friends? And so that's another important point. But as Barbara mentioned earlier, our data do also dispel some of the myths about social media, because what we see from our research is that only 12% of young people say that their status is set as public. So a lot of young people are setting their status private, so they're are digitally savvy. And it's interesting because we found that the young adults in our sample were much more likely to have their status set as public. So the younger teens are actually more savvy that way. We still see that the predominant place where young people are bullied is the school. So often there's a perception that it's completely changed to cyberbullying. We still see 73% saying that they were bullied predominantly in the school environment. And we also ask, for example, have you ever been sent a mean message? And 60% say that they've never been sent a mean message, and 30% say they've only been sent it once. So it's important to put the context of social media and mental health with actually an understanding of the patterns of young people's behaviours.
I think you've answered that really well, Amanda. There was another one that I guess is just linked with stressors that has come through, and I think perhaps some of the people on this call are better placed to answer or to discuss this. It's 65% of students suffer with anxiety, namely exam pressure. So why do we have an educational system that measures success by sitting one exam? The leave insert. I don't know what more we can add to that, based on what Barbara said earlier. Yeah, just exams are one of the major stresses identified by adolescents. Similarly, college for the young adults. And it was the same in My World 1. Yeah, Barbara, you're nodding. Yeah, is there anything else we want to say?
I think so. I think when we look at the third level sector, it's college, it's assignments, even higher than some of the finances. So it's the things that they're encountering on a daily basis are those that they're likely to contribute. I'm sure I have young adults in my house, and when they talk about what's stressing them out, it's pressures of their work. It's they're also doing other exams, professional exams, that stresses them out. So it's kind of depending on the stage of life. I suppose we see things that as we go through those stages of life, they're likely to encounter difficulties for us. As you come to older life, you're probably stressing out about being retired, or when you have enough money to do that. So it's but I do concur that maybe the way we construct our leaving cert is not ideal, and it does add to the pressures, particularly being such a high stakes exam after 2 years of work. But again, we're not in that sector, so we can purely point to it rather than have a solution.
Great. So another question that came up then, and actually I think this question might have been asked just before you got to the data on it, Barbara, but it just asked, has there been a breakdown of results to specific years within the junior and senior cycle? And we have actually looked at the age breakdown for every school year, and that's in the main report. And for the purpose of today, we talked earlier, Barbara, how we just said it was good to give a snapshot of junior and senior cycle, but very much in line with what we're seeing with the junior senior cycle data. We're seeing that kind of linear progression in increases in risk as the young person gets older, and the decrease in protective factors. We do see kind of certain years, sometimes we see that the third year, again in line with the previous question, and the 6th years often might experience heightened stress on some key risks compared to the other cohorts. Is there anything else that Aileen or Barbara that you think I've missed there in terms of answering that question?
No, I would concur. It just very much maps. It goes back to that very, very first slide we had pretty well, which shows the graph of increase. So it's something we would see. In fact, if we didn't see it, we would wonder, did we actually collect the data appropriately? So it's not that we want to prove what's out there in terms of mental health difficulties, but it just adds some validity to the way we collect the data. So it's not an unexpected finding that we see these increases. And we did look at the data in the main report across different years, but We'd such a short time to talk today. We felt that if we delved into every single year across all the single variables, that it might be just become meaningless. So that's why we kind of split it into junior, senior cycle.
Yeah, there is another one, a methodological one that came in earlier on around why is life satisfaction higher on the mean score than self-esteem. So I think part of that we can explain by the way that those measures are scored. So the life satisfaction scale has a different range. It's slightly higher range than the self-esteem, the Rosenberg scale. And again, if you know, if you're interested in looking at the scales that were used, and that it's in the appendix of the main report, and they're also, while they're linked, they are different variables. So you know, you would expect generally people who have higher self-esteem, you know, would have higher life satisfaction, but there may be nuances between that. You know, again, Barbara and Amanda, if you want to add anything.
No, I think that's perfect. That it's just that it's not that life satisfaction is higher than self-esteem. It's just the range of scores are different for the two measures. Just to maybe clarify, what we tried to do is the majority of the variables we studied are variables that have been used in other international studies and have been shown to be valid and reliable. So rather than just ask a young person, are you stressed? Are you anxious? Are you depressed? Are you satisfied with your life? We use what we call standardized instruments, so that we could stand over the reliability and the validity. So it's the range of those measures differ rather than they are different in themselves.
I have a question here. I think it's a big one, and it's what can a teacher do to support our young people and become that one good person? And I suppose it's, you know, it's a complex question, but I think first of all, you know, I suppose the first thing is, you know, a teacher having their own good self-care strategies themselves to be able to support a young person is very important. But also thinking back to what the one good adult is, it's about being a person that a young person can trust, and a person that listens to a young person. So actually being a person that a young person can come to, that they trust, is really important. So actually that element of trust. And we see from our data that teachers were actually the top source of formal support that young people will go to for informational support about their mental health. So teachers are really important to young people's mental health. I suppose in building resilience and enhancing or teaching young people about self-care strategies, these are some things that directly came from the My World survey. We see that if you can, I suppose, tell young people about the importance of sleep or exercise, and I suppose not doing it in a patronizing way as well, maybe through discussion, and but we do see that those simple strategies for all young people are positive to their mental health. And then there are a smaller number who do need more significant supports, and in that case I think it's about being able to signpost a young person and being able to direct them to, you know, the appropriate supports that are there. Also, we know that resilience is really important for a young person, so for some way through the teaching to be able to build in some level of resilience, teaching would be important as well. Do you want to add anything, Barbara and Aileen, to that?
No, I think that's pretty good, Amanda.
Yeah, and I think just to, you know, with where young people are likely to go if they experience difficulty, teacher or guidance counsellor did come up and the top sources of formal support. So oftentimes young people were actually saying they would go to a teacher if they're experiencing mental health difficulty. Most often young people go to informal sources of support, so they will go to friends, to family, parents, extended family members. Okay. There are two that have come in linked to the gender stuff that Barbara, you touched on. The first, you know, I'm surprised females actually have higher anxiety and depression, and yet more males commit suicide than females. Why is that the case? And what we found in the My World survey is, you know, I guess reflects a pattern that's observed at a national level, and it's captured by the National Suicide Research Foundation as well, the NSRF, who look at presentations to A&E departments around the country, and what's captured by the CSO. So yeah, often, you know, males use more lethal methods when they're attempting suicide, hence unfortunately why they are more successful. But the patterns of deliberate self-harm do tend to be higher in females. So you know, that would be linked with anxiety and depression. And then the second part of that question, do girls cope better with mental health issues than boys? Is it a case that girls talk more openly? You know, if Barbara, if Amanda, if you want to come in on that one.
I'm going to go back to the first one too, about
Yeah.
So that's absolutely the case. The other piece that's kind of linked to that is a lot of deaths by suicide involve alcohol, and they're one of the contributing factors. And we also know that males engage in more risky alcohol behavior. So I think it's a multifactorial thing that males are more likely to die by suicide. But the primary one being that it's it's more, they use more lethal means, and that's been kind of found. In terms of the second part of the question about females and sorry, can you rephrase that one for me? I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah. Do they cope better? Maybe do females cope better with mental health issues?
I can come in on that.
Yeah, you go ahead there, Amanda.
Yeah, and you can add, Barbara, because but I think it's a yes and no. So we know that females will access more social support, that they will talk more about their problems. So in that way, they will go and talk and seek that social support, and they're also maybe more likely to go and seek that professional support. So in those ways, they will. But we also see that females have higher levels of distress than males, and we also know that males will engage in more problem-focused coping. So males are more likely to go and kind of find a solution to the problem or make a plan how to deal with the problem. And with the avoidant coping, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but females engage in higher levels of avoidant coping, didn't they, in the data? So they also, so while they engage in more seeking social support, they also are more likely to avoid their problems and not deal with them head on. So it's not a yes or no that it's kind of, we need to consider the picture. They're often experiencing more distress, but they are more likely to go and actually make that connection and talk about their problems. And that's the issue with males, that they're less likely to talk about their problems, even particularly when it comes to like a romantic relationship breakup, they are a lot less likely to talk about those. So it's in some ways, females, yes, they do cope better, but in other ways they don't.
Yeah, and we do know that avoidant coping behavior is linked to poor mental health. So again, it's multifactorial. Now, I'm not a biologist, and so don't take me as a biologist, but I also think there are hormonal pieces with females that can interact with mood, which again can be more impactful in females than males. So as I said, I think there are many things at play that can contribute to this difference we're seeing between gender, male and female. And I just maybe to acknowledge, when we did the data analysis, we didn't just ask young people about whether they were male or female. They did have the option to identify as non-binary, but over 90%, over 99% of them identified as male, female. And given the very tiny percentage who didn't, we didn't have a large enough sample size to really look in depth from an analysis point of view, those young people that didn't identify themselves as male, female. Because I know there is an acknowledgement now that it would be inappropriate just to ask in a survey, are you male or are you female? And just to reassure you, we didn't do that. But the majority overwhelmingly had identified themselves as binary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I linked to that one. Then there was another question about the gender differences and potentially that being explained by a higher level of self-awareness among the two genders. But in ways, I think you've touched on that in terms of the type of strategies females tend to use, you know, when seeking support or when experiencing difficulties. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I have another question here. It would be interesting to see if there were differences between rural and urban schools. I live in a village and I feel it increases the level of connectedness because the school is seen as a social setting too. And it absolutely would be interesting to look at that, and we can look at that. We haven't done it yet, so we don't actually know about that, but we can look at urban rural locations and link it to connectedness. So that would be something interesting to look at, yeah.
Well, we looked at IWR Survey 1 in terms of location. We didn't find an effect. But again, you know, who's to say we haven't? But for this data set, we haven't looked at it as yet. I had a question that's gone, so I'm assuming it's gone.
Yeah, it's there are quite a few coming in. Actually, I have some more. Bullying's become more and more of an issue for my male students. A lot of comments like digs, you know, mind games, and the lads themselves seem unable to shrug it off but some turn to anger or other negative reactions to deal with it. So is there any practical advice for promoting resilience at a more senior level that they could cope with on top of other stressors such as schoolwork and relationships? It can be too much to cope. I think Amanda touched on some of what a good, from the My World survey, what we have in terms of, a good adult and making yourself available to support young people. In terms of whether or not there's anything more we can add to that.
The level of bullying is down from the first study, so I suppose that's I think I'd really start with that. And I know schools have worked really hard in terms of having anti-bullying strategies, getting their students engaged in promoting kind of respect and positive messages around acknowledging people, acknowledging differences and not bullying. So we do see that the level of bullying is down from My World Survey 1. So that would be the first piece. I think it is an issue, and we do know from the data, and we know from the data the last time and this time, young people who identified that they have been bullied. Now, we used in our data set, we were using their own definition of bullying. We're not actually what they say. We acknowledge if they tell us they've been bullied, that we look to see whether it impacted on them. We have not used a survey instrument that would be defined to measure level of bullying. So just that caveat. But for those who've identified that they've been bullied, certainly their mental health is poorer than those who say they have not been bullied. So we acknowledge, we agree with you, it is impactful, and it's impactful for both males and females. I suppose it's the way to try and reduce bullying. Whether we'll ever we should have zero tolerance, of course. Whether we get to actually zero rates is probably difficult to say and probably difficult to do. But to acknowledge that obviously there's a lot of really good work happening in schools that has tried to minimize the effect of bullying on young people.
And capturing, I guess, what was in the comment or in the question, verbal bullying was what we observed to be the most common or prevalent type of bullying. Yeah. And I know we're running short on time. Amanda, you might have more.
Yeah, I'll run through. There's one. The first one here is: do we know relating to the One Good Adult where the young people are accessing these One Good Adults? Are they at home or in school? I suppose. I mean, we know the One Good Adult in the teens that it's their mother. So the main predominant person is the mother. So that would suggest it's in the home. But when they're 18 to 25 years, it shifts, and that One Good Adult is actually their friend. Do you think that's addressing the question, or is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have the data that you had earlier, Amanda, in a slide in front of me. So when it was broken down by who they identified, 35% of the adolescents identified somebody within their family. A further 30% specifically identified their mother. 4% identified their father. 6% multiple sources, so they just didn't name one, even though they were asked to just name one. 17% did not specify. And then 8% reported other sources, particularly those that wouldn't be associated directly with the family. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. That breaks it down. I have a COVID question. I was wondering who would be getting that. It just says that in the DETS context that we're currently looking at the well-being of students at this time and how will young people's mental health be affected during COVID with isolation from peers and school connectedness, added exam stress due to social capital, parent support and lack of access to internet and devices. So that's a big question, and I was actually trying to look up a bit about the COVID and young people's mental health, and the Anna Freud Centre have some really excellent resources on it. But actually a lot of the suggestions were mirroring some stuff that we saw here in our My World findings. It was saying about being a trusted young person and being a trusted adult and staying calm and thought was really important, potentially sending young people reputable websites. So if they're looking up information about this, that there's a lot of, as you would have heard, fake news about COVID, and actually directing them to the appropriate sites. And again, linking with the social media, that it is tremendously fantastic now, given that it's a way that they can actually contact their friends and so on. But also, so I suppose taking a step back and a break away from that is important too, that they're not just excessively on social media all the time, being able to take a step back and do some other activities are good as well. And another thing was, I suppose, in line with what we see is that particularly here with teens, that it is about their peers. They really want to stay connected with their peers. So in whatever way that can be done to try and maintain them interacting with their friends in a classroom setting, that for them is really, really important. So in whatever way they can be supported would be important. I don't know if there's anything else, Barbara.
Jigsaw Online, if people who are on the call are trying supporting young people, or in touch with young people, you can send them to one of those websites, Jigsaw Online. We've got materials that are regularly updated, available there. We're also running 2 webinars a day with young people that are moderated, or group chats rather, and they're moderated by clinicians. So yeah, and our social media pages, so Facebook, Twitter, etc., have the links to those as well, so people can definitely share those with young people. We have another one here, which is just really, about how, any suggestions as to how we can share the findings with colleagues and parents. So we do have a website, myworldsurvey.ie, and the full report is up on that website. There are also links with different infographics and key findings. I'm not sure if there are other ways other than to say that if they are in Jigsaw service areas, that the workshops that Jigsaw offer, the content in those often reflect, they will reflect what we found here. Yeah, I don't know, Barbara, Amanda, if there's anything else in terms of, I guess each school who participated in My World, if they had over 80 participants, they're also, the nominated contact there is also getting a copy of a report that has data for their school.
I agree. I suppose some of the data we presented here today were specific for you. So the way we broke the data down, senior cycle, junior cycle, a lot of the gender and the DET, non-DET. I did that analysis yesterday for today, but so to give you just a little bit more depth, because you could just go read the report for yourself. So I felt that it would be useful that I tried to maybe zone in on things that are, I suppose, that would be important for you as teachers. Like what school cycle are they in? Well, we've got boys and girls in our class, or this is a DET school. How might that affect? So those things are not in the report, and the purpose was to try and add value to you coming online today to the webinar. So we haven't published those. In other words, they're just done.
They're hot off the press, and also I know the webinar is going to be recorded, so I suppose we can discuss how that could be disseminated at another point as well.
Great. Yeah, we're at 5 past, so
yeah, I'm just coming back in. Yeah, we're just at 5 now. So I suppose I just wanted to come in and say thanks a million to our 3 panelists. And thanks for all your questions as well. There was 1 or 2 questions I got back to myself privately, but I suppose just to kind of say, we're going to be running a series of different webinars on different topics for teachers. So do look out for them both on Jigsaw Online, but also through the Learn Upon system as well. And I suppose especially at the moment when things are a little bit different, shall we say, we will be running webinars to support teachers around different topics, including some of the ones that came up kind of through the questions. But thanks again to our presenters and our panelists. We really appreciate you giving the time. This is going to be recorded and it will be available on Jigsaw Online and as well as the ESCE website. So all the Jigsaw Connect series is presented in collaboration with ESCE, the Education Support Centres in Ireland. So thank you to them as well. So great, thanks a million.
Okay,
thanks very much. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.